Welcome to the Youth Voice, a podcast giving young people a voice in politics across the island of Ireland. So today we're doing a very special impromptu episode about the DBS by-election. It's gripping Southern politics and everyone's very excited about it. So we're going to talk to some, I suppose, young people from the South in the different parties. So we're talking to Brian from Fianna Fáil, Joshua from Fine Gael, and Jack from Labour. So all of you, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us, Dermot.
So first of all, I suppose I'll just kind of fire at a bit of a softer question here, but what's it like being back on the ground canvassing? I know we had the big election last year, but we haven't really seen anything since. So what is it like to be out leafleting, out canvassing, out with all of the big politicians again?
It's great, yeah. I mean, like, COVID happened so abruptly, and I think we're all off the foot of the general election there, and I think we're definitely all missing, getting into politics. And it's nice to be back on doors and talking to people, and yeah.
And how are you finding, Jack?
I suppose it's a great relief from the kind of social media campaigning that we've seen over the last year or so in the middle of the pandemic. It's really kind of changed the dynamic of youth politics in particular. And I notice when you go back on doors and you get to, meet up with, I suppose, older members of your party and kind of, demographics broaden a bit. It's a bit more, I suppose, representative and true to real life than just being, I suppose, stuck within Zooms and, and the virtual conferences and webinars. So it's great in that regard, just to be kind of back out and to be able to tangibly engage with politics. I suppose kind of what Josh said, which it was great to be back out on doors,
How are you finding it, Brian? Back out with Fianna Fáil.
Being from Kildare, when someone asks me how I'm finding Dublin Bay South, I usually say Google Maps. But yeah, no, from the perspective of being back on the ground, especially from an Ógra perspective, it's absolutely fantastic. Like I'm sure Jack and Joshua and their respective youth wings have had members join in the last 14 months who no one's ever met. I think it's so important youth politics that you meet people and you see eye to eye. That's why we have our national events and stuff. And there's people working on this campaign. Who were working on this campaign. It's the last hurrah now. So who we're working with, who only joined in the last year, and it's wonderful to meet them, and it's nice for them to see the more on the ground side of politics, meeting people, talking to real people, because I think a lot of the time we can get lost in the Twitterverse and the social media kind of verse, and you don't meet the real people on the ground, on the doors, and get a sense for what the world is like outside of the bubble, But I've loved every minute of it, It's especially the social pints of lemonade afterwards, yourself, but they didn't hurt either. But it's great to meet. Like, I met Jack for the first time during this election, and I think I met Joshua as well, briefly. But it's just great to be back in person, socialising.
Oh, absolutely. It is. It's brilliant to actually everything opening up and all. But let's get on to the candidates. This has been a lot of big names this election. Sinn Féin brought in Lynn Boylan. We've seen, Ivana Bacik for your party, Jack. With James Geoghegan down with you, Joshua, and then as well, obviously, Deirdre Conroy. So all kind of, other than possibly Lynn, who is still kind of been in politics for a while, all seasoned veterans, really, when it comes to even not just electoral, but kind of the whole world of politics. So I suppose we'll start with you, Joshua. The 15-minute city, it's James Geoghegan's big thing.
Yeah.
But I want to know, is it really, is there any substance to it, or is it just kind of a throwaway policy to kind of attract people?
Yeah, well, I mean, I suppose for the main focus of a 15-minute city would be getting everything within the city accessible within 15 minutes, and that's more than driving. It's about moving people towards public transport, being able to cycle places. There's been a huge lack of investment in public transport over the past few years, and we need to make places much more accessible. And I think 15 minutes is a very good goal to have services within. It's not too long. It's feasible to have most of our services within 15 minutes. And I think it's a very good policy that James has been putting forward on the doors.
And Brian, with, I suppose, Deirdre Conroy, she didn't really have, I suppose, the big like I suppose big policy was James Geoghegan 15-minute city, and everyone kind of focused on that almost. But what is the kind of standout policies for you? What is Deirdre Conroy bringing to the table, I suppose?
Well, I suppose from my perspective, like I've been out in the wind and the rain and the sun and everything. It's a pretty wild array of weather, and I've done that with Deirdre happily day after day. Throughout the campaign, I've worked with Deirdre because I believe in her. Like from my own perspective, my mom was a single mother who went back to college later in life to get her master's. So I know how the struggle is for single parent families who go back to education, and that I found out that Deirdre did the same thing. And I thought, like, that's someone, you don't hear that about that a lot. And there aren't a lot of supports for single parents going back to education, trying to improve themselves and to the betterment of themselves. So I thought that was one perspective. Deirdre could represent the people who fall through the cracks in Irish society. There's the Dáil is not diverse enough. We need more women, more young people as well. But we need a more vast array of people from different socioeconomic and just different social backgrounds and situations. And Deirdre, I felt, fulfilled one of those situations. And I suppose the second point would be Deirdre, her whole ethos around politics has been community consultation. So if there's a cycle lane going on Ringsend, which we've seen is an issue, she wants the community put there. There's far too much of a divide, I feel anyway, and I know Deirdre would agree with me, between politicians and the people they represent. It's all well and good doing clinics and stuff, but when it comes to council decisions, we need to be making people informed and consulting with them. Like, even if we look at the bus connects, Deirdre wants a feasibility study done into the metro, and she'd be much more leaning towards the underground metro because it's less invasive, and that's what people want. Like throughout the campaign, like, I know it sounds a bit mad, but we ended up dragging Darragh O'Brien out of his office to meet with people because everyone's saying housing. So I'm sure what's the point in Darragh being up in the department? Like, we need to bring him to the people that it's affecting and talk to them, because they're real people with real issues. And I suppose that's what Deirdre is all about. It's about bridging the divide and representing people who sometimes don't feel too represented.
Absolutely. And I suppose Jack as well, we all kind of know Ivana Bacik. She's been around a very long time in politics. She was a big name in the 2014 or 2011 to 2014 coalition. So we all know who she is. But I suppose in this kind of, the political situation has evolved so much since then. So what is she bringing, I suppose, as well to the table? What are people going to see if, Ivana Bacik is brought into this Dáil?
Well, to be honest with you, Dermot, I think you've really hit the nail on the head there with talking about coalition. I think one thing that Ivana is going to show to the voters of Dublin Bay South and to the broader kind of Irish political sphere is that we're going to see a new side of Ivana Bacik, a side that I suppose has been very enigmatic. If you look back, Ivana is a seasoned campaigner and has always not just stood for change, but has put her words into practice and has achieved change since her student activist days from the 1980s, when she was working, on abortion rights and giving out information to women on abortion when it was illegal to do so, and fighting against the pro-life group SPUC, going to court and nearly risking prison to do so. I know that's always kind of the story that Ivana is defined by when we look in the past, but I think looking to today and what Ivana can bring to the Dáil if she is elected, she's going to really bring a strong opposition voice and an experienced voice when it comes to opposition politics. For the last 5 years now, she has sat in opposition. She's now leader of the opposition in the Seanad, and she really knows what it's like to put forward bills and to get them passed. She has the best track record on passing legislation of any senator in the Seanad, and any Labour senator and an opposition senator in history. So she really does put her words into practice when anything from collective bargaining for people in the arts sector to outlawing FGM to working on citizenship and birthright citizenship rights with Labour youth and everything in between. She's put her words into practice. And I think if she's elected, what we're going to see is someone who is going to hold the government to account and someone who has experience in doing that. And one thing I would like to draw on, Brian made a very, very good point there. We need more diverse representation in Dáil Éireann, and I think we can all agree on that. We need more diverse representation in terms of gender. We need more women in the Dáil. We need people from more diverse ethnic backgrounds, and I think that's something Ivana brings as well. Born to a Czech father and an Irish mother, she brings a very, very unique perspective on the diversity that we need in the Dáil, the equity that we need to see represented in electoral politics. So I think that's one big thing that Ivana will bring as well. But on the whole, I think she's a fantastic candidate and someone who will really represent the people of her constituency, her home constituency, very, very well.
And I suppose it's time to get into the hard questions. I'll start again with you, Joshua. James Geoghegan, he has kind of throughout this election been known as the Renewer man, but Fine Gael's running him as the progressive candidate. It's, for a lot of people, are seeing it as a really interesting, I suppose, I don't know if the word's juxtaposition, I was terrible at English, but is he really the progressive candidate? He's a man from Renewer. Is he really the progressive candidate that Fine Gael is portraying him to be?
Well, I mean, look, the situation with Renewer is that James is working as Lucinda Creighton's PA, and I think, as a young person, he was only young when he was working for her, and I think we all understand that if you're working in a steady job, you can't just drop tools the second the TD changes away from your politics, and he was in a position where he had to continue working with that. He's shown in other ways that he was in favour of the repeal the 8th referendum. He signed up for Lawyers for Yes, and he spoke openly about being in favour of repealing the 8th. So I do think James is a progressive candidate.
And Brian, what we're seeing in the polling anyway is that it's looking like a kind of race between Fine Gael, Sinn Féin, and Labour. Almost forgot what you call Labour there, but is Deirdre Conroy really in the race, or is this just a case where Fianna Fáil are floating a candidate?
No, I'd never. I do trust polls, but I'd never trust them from the outset. I'd be very much in the belief you'd better to die on your feet than live on your knees. We have fought Fine Gael, Labour, and Soc Dems, PPP for every single vote. We've had a volunteer group of constantly about 100 people. We've had 5 ward bosses working on the areas. I've been out in Ringsend, dragging ministers up to the flats, because I feel they're an area that a lot of politicians neglect. I know, coming from Kildare, it's something that there are negative stereotypes with the flats, which I do not believe for one second, because there's some of the nicest people in there. But I think, we need to be approaching this from the perspective of it's an even playing ground. We've got great candidates across the board. It's about the people and what they want for their area. I know the whole nation is watching this election, but at the end of the day, the nation isn't going to have to go to Ivana Bacik. The nation isn't going to have to go to James Geoghegan or Deirdre Conroy. It's the people of Dublin Bay South that are going to have to go to them. So I think the polls are saying that Deirdre doesn't have a shot, but from talking to people and the amount of work that we put in, and just her general track record on Dublin City Council, I'd say she will be in for a good shot. Hopefully, I'd always have hope, eternal optimist. But look, I suppose it's not over until the fella announces it at the council centre, and unfortunately I won't be there on the off chance that Deirdre does win to lift her up on the shoulders. But I think it's anyone's race. Hopefully anyway, it's a pretty even playing ground. Everyone's put in a great effort. That's what I'd say.
And Jack, I'll stop really going for you after this one, but I want to know, Ivana Bacik has kind of, she's a figure of the coalition, I suppose, and the coalition is unpopular, to say the least. Was that, if is really running someone who was a key figure in a coalition that seems to be really hated by people and made a lot of people's lives worse, is that really the best move for Labour? I think Jack's frozen on us there.
In terms of the coalition being unpopular, Dermot, you don't have I? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now. There we go.
Oh. Hear me now, yeah? No,
yeah.
The coalition being unpopular goes, you're preaching to the converted. It's not a popular thing even in the Labour Party today. And I think the last 2017 and 2018 conference, the fact that we passed 2 motions against going into coalition again is a very, very monumental step in showing that we are not happy with the previous actions of the party. And I'd hold my hand up here and say I'm not one for sitting in coalition with parties. No, and I'm not going to specify because I'm conscious of the fact that both of the lads here are in government parties, but parties that are going to inflict austerity and make people's lives inevitably worse. I think as far as running Ivana goes, I think the associations that are made between Ivana and the coalition are sensibly tenuous, because she was in the Seanad at the time. She was deputy leader of the Seanad by virtue of her being one of the most experienced figures within Labour's Seanad team. But I think, given the current government and the failings that we've seen,
actually placed towards the government parties, rather than someone who now has been in opposition for 5 years, who has passed very, very strong legislation, and who has shown herself to be a strong progressive left campaigner. I know it's, I can say from experience that the coalition really, really negative
class families, that goes without saying. But I think Ivana, given her track record beyond the coalition, has proven by far and away to be definable by a lot more than just her position in the position she found herself in while we were in government.
Absolutely. And I suppose I'm going to ask you all, because we have no one from Sinn Féin here today, I want to ask you all about Lynn Boylan, because she's a very popular senator. I don't think any of us are really going to deny that. She's become quite a popular figure in Irish politics. So I want to ask you about her. First, I suppose we'll go back to you, Joshua, again, because you started off. You may as well start off this one. Is Lynn the biggest threat, do you think? Is she the one that you really need to be looking out for, or are you who else are you scared of if not?
Well, I don't think we're scared of anything. I think we're reasonably confident that James has a pretty good chance, and I'm hopeful he'll be a TD after the count on Friday. But I think that this election has had a major kind of shift. Originally, it was pinned as a 2-horse race between James and Lynn, and I think that's really shifted, and we've seen that. And I think that the Irish Times poll had a major impact on that. And I think, look, Senator Lynn Boylan is a very capable politician. She lives here in my constituency, married to my TD Owen O'Brien, and she has a great track record. But I don't think she has the support there. I don't think Sinn Féin has the support in Dublin Bay South that they need to win that seat. The way I see it, it's going to be a fight between James and Ivana Bacik, and I think it's going to come down quite tight.
And Jack, I'll go to the second time. This time we'll finish it off with Brian. But Lynn, I suppose she's been a very strong opposition candidate. Are you worried about her? Because it seems that while Deirdre and James are fighting to kind of for the government votes, the people that are really in favour of the government, the opposition votes really seem to be split between yourselves and Sinn Féin. There will be, other people from PBP and Soc Dems, obviously, but it really seems to be a 2-horse race, but for the opposition people. So are you worried about Lynn Boylan?
Well, I think Lynn is a very, very seasoned campaigner, a fantastic voice for women's rights, a brilliant member of the European Parliament, and someone who I'm going to hold my hand up and say now, I would definitely advise people to give her a high preference if you're in Dublin Bay South, because she's a fantastic contender in this race. But I do think that Labour are quietly confident about our chances in this by-election. I think Lynn is a very, very, as I said, capable person, and it's seen that she has a broad swathe of support in many parts of the constituency. But I honestly don't think that A, the transfers will be there for Lynn, and B, that the polls are as inaccurate as people are putting them down to be. I think it's a very fair representation of what I've been hearing on the doors, and I would really think that we should be quietly confident in regards to looking at Lynn as a contender. But that said, very high turnout in the areas that Lynn is very popular in, so that could all shift the dynamic. But I would still say that although Lynn is a brilliant campaigner and is someone who I think would make a very good second or third choice for me for a TD for DBS. I think Ivana has a lead that is going to, be solid, and it'll be consolidated by voters coming out and showing their support for Ivana. So no, I don't think there should be any fear around Lynn at the moment.
And Brian, I suppose what's really interesting about DBS being the one where Sinn Féin seem to be a contender, it's Jim O'Callaghan's constituency, and Jim O'Callaghan is, I suppose, considered on the United Ireland, one of the biggest people in Fianna Fáil for United Ireland. So I suppose when it comes to that's Sinn Féin's thing. I suppose it's their number one priority is United Ireland, but it's also a really big thing for Jim O'Callaghan. So I suppose there's obviously going to be kind of that kind of opinion in Dublin Bay South. So I want to know, do you think that will help sway voters towards Deirdre Conroy because you have such a strong kind of voice for United Ireland and a border poll in DBS with Fianna Fáil?
Look, Dermot, I might quote the great Jack Lynch, and I believe I might get a few words wrong, but no man has a higher claim to republicanism than any other man. Lynn Boylan can be just as Republican as Big Jim. I can be just as Republican as Jack. Personally, I'm actually quite fond of Lynn. I met her while I was doing a bit of TY work experience in European Parliament, so I might be a bit biased. It's hard to criticise her from that perspective because I'm personally quite fond of her. From an electioneering point of view, I think Sinn Féin have really marginalised themselves. Throughout the campaign, we were trying to focus on kind of positive stuff. I know personally I was a little bit critical of the of Ivana, and I'm sure other people were critical of my candidate. But from the actual electioneering perspective and the message that you're putting forward, it should be always primarily about your own candidate because you don't want to marginalise your vote. I know there might be some Fine Gael soft Fianna Fáil voters who might transfer over, and I know there might be some Fianna Fáil voters who might transfer to Ivana, so you don't want to marginalise your vote in any way, shape or form. And then as well as that, it's the end the cycle of FFFG, or this rhetoric put forward of it's a referendum against the government and their performance. People can say that, but at the end of the day, none of these candidates are actually TDs at the parliamentary party meetings. If you look at James O'Connor, one of our TDs, he was very, very critical of some of the policies we put forward in terms of the lockdown. And that's a voice that the people of Cork have at the parliamentary party meeting table. So it's a voice inside the party, inside the government, who can actually make change, opposed to, not being there. Look, I think Lynn could do well. It's anyone's race really at this stage. I think a lot of people are overlooking the Greens. And I think a lot of people are overlooking Deirdre. She's actually quite a nice person. I've yet to meet too many people who have a bad word to say about her. She'd be transfer friendly enough. Because I know there might be Sinn Féin voters who might transfer to us or give us a preference. So it's I don't see Lynn as a massive threat. But I recognise that anyone could be a threat really if they put in the work.
Absolutely. I suppose just on time we're going to wrap it up. So lads, thank you all for coming on. I suppose I would say good luck with campaigning, but campaigning's over now. So I suppose well done in campaigning. Thank you for coming on. But to all of our listeners, as always, thank you for listening. You can read our blog, obviously, at youthvoiceni.com. Catch us on Twitter at youthvoiceni, or catch us on Instagram at youthvoice_ni. I've been your host, Dermot Hamill, and we'll see you all next time.